I'd like to now sort of move on to Ellen's presentation.
Yeah.
And although it's a different perspective, I'm going to ask Ellen to also try to make these connections because I think there's
Yeah,
quite some connections between the two presentations.
I will. I will. Okay, perfect. Yeah, so thanks a lot. Hi, everyone, again. So I will be focusing on, well, let's say the externalities of food system transformation, but I'll indeed link also to the theoretical framework Mutuma was already referring to, the multi-level perspective. Um, and central is the European Green Deal, but yeah, specifically its impacts on countries like Ghana, like Indonesia. Bram, can you go next? Yeah, so the main agenda for today is indeed I'll introduce the specific regulation. Then I'll discuss shortly, well, some transformation theories. We call it just sustainability transformation theories. And I'll dive into a case, the case study of the Ghana's cocoa sector. Next. Oh, next, we can skip this. I'm afraid I don't have enough time. So my background is in development economy, moved gradually over time to sociology. I worked for a long time at the Royal Tropical Institute, which is a bit between, well, let's say theory and practice. We did not really have our foot, let's say, in the field, feet in the field, but we advised NGOs, government institutions working on, well, food system transformation. And my PhD was on markets, food markets and traders in Mali. So the central in all my work has been, well, global agri-food value chains and food systems. Bram, can you go to the next? And I want to talk today about the European Green Deal, which is a huge package of policies targeted to Europe in order to make its food system more sustainable. So it's actually a range of different policy instruments, also, well, within Europe. But particular is the fact that Europe, well, recognizes that its food system has implications for countries elsewhere. So there's this idea that, for example, if countries here are stimulated to move towards more plant-based diets, it does impact. It impacts maybe positively producers of chickpeas in Turkey, but it might have negative repercussions for soy producers in Brazil. So that's a bit what I want to touch upon today. One big set of policy instruments in the European Green Deal is directed towards global value chains. And this is started from the recognition that, well, all the voluntary standards and voluntary agreements did not really, well, result in impact on the ground. So the European Union has identified, I'll come back to that later, but let's say 7 commodities that are known for contributing to deforestation elsewhere. And the European Union wants to, well, stop this, halt this, or at least make sure that all the products from outside Europe consumed in Europe at least do not contribute to deforestation. It does so through asking, well, the companies importing these products to make sure that they can prove that their produce or their resources do not contribute to deforestation. And in order to do so, they have to show very detailed information on the geolocations. Where did they get the cocoa? Where did they get the oil palm? And all throughout the value chain. How has it been transported? Who got paid what margin? How did this transport contribute to, well, biodiversity loss, carbon emissions, or deforestation? So it's actually prescription for corporate business to prevent negative impacts on the environment. Bram, can you move to the next one? So these are the 7 crops: oil palm, soil, wood, cocoa, coffee, cattle, rubber, all known for contributing to deforestation. Today I'll be talking about cocoa, of course, also grown in several countries, but I will specifically talk about the case of Ghana. The next again. And there's a lot of debate about this way of, well, greening or making food systems more sustainable. In a way, you can say that this is really, well, let's say, an external force. These big regulations do oblige companies, governments to comply with the new regulation on sustainability. So it's how to say it, major shake-up of the systems as we have known. Yet it's very much steered by, well, let's say, top-down governance. The European Union has decided we want to become sustainable, and this is necessary, under the guise of leaving no one behind. Of course, the idea itself, I think, is very positive. Well, accounting for the externalities, the way it has been implemented has put a lot of debate and a lot of critique. Next one. What is happening, of course, is that these value chains, which often involve a lot of stakeholders, from small farmers, distributors, buyers, need to be transparent and need to apply to a lot of regulation, comply with a lot of regulations. Farmers are now obliged to use blockchain, smartphones to register every single coconut in the system, so that it becomes traceable. So it leads to, let's say, highly complex codifiable value chains with possible negative repercussions for farmers that cannot comply, sometimes just because they don't have the satellite data or just because they don't have access to these systems, which means that they cannot prove that their cocoa, oil palm, rubber has not contributed to deforestation, and as a consequence cannot export to the European Union. So that's a bit, let's say, criticasters of this policy have said that smallholders become more and more dependent on the companies. And as far as we can now see, is specifically the big companies, the Cargills, that have their own monitoring systems and are able to comply with the laws. But for smaller companies, smaller processing companies, is very difficult. It requires indeed, the access to monitoring systems, and it requires a lot to make your value chain completely transparent. Next slide, please. This is a colleague of mine, Otto. He's in in the middle of the table, and he knows a lot about. He works a lot with oil palm in Indonesia. And I selected this picture because what the European Union also does, it distinguishes between countries that are high risk and countries that are low risk when it comes to deforestation. Indonesia is classified as high risk, and the governor of Indonesia expressed his discontent. He was very unhappy that this label was stuck to his country without any discussion or involvement from the Indonesian side. Next slide. And that's a bit what is now happening. So an attempt to make the European food system more sustainable has led to a lot of discussion. Countries in, Africa, Asia, claiming that this is another neo-colonial endeavor under the guise of sustainability. Some people even say, well, this is not just greenwashing, this is even more control for the European Union. And another critique is that there has been little inclusion and support to suppliers for preparing and being able to comply with the regulations. And now we'll move to the case of Ghana. Next slides. And the next slide again. Yes, so this is an example of how difficult is this governance. So at the European level, you can decide to step in because, hey, companies, NGOs voluntarily, they don't manage to deal with the problems. So now the government is stepping in. Things become, legally obligatory. But then there's, of course, the global context in which there's transnational networks, there's civil society, there's nation states, subnational governments. So it shows that implementing these regulations it is very complex endeavor. Nice. Next. So Ghana's cocoa sector, I'm sure there might be Ghanaians now present that know much better than I do. But the cocoa sector in Ghana is strongly governed by the National Cocoa Marketing Board, the COCOBOD. It's dominated, production is dominated by smallholders, of whom most live in poverty, extreme poverty. And agriculture in general, but cocoa is a major contributor, is the largest contributor to deforestation. Next slide. This is the cocoa supply chain in Ghana. As you see, it involves a lot of actors, cocoa farms, purchasing clerks, licensed by companies, then the cocoa marketing board, and then there's traders. And in Ghana, it's an interesting, well, let's say, interplay, because the cocoa marketing board from the beginning has said, well, fine, these regulations, we are going to comply with them. We'll install our monitoring system that's accessible to anyone. So it should be accessible to cocoa farmers to make sure that everyone can comply. However, the monitoring system is not yet in place, and some bigger companies are afraid that, well, it will be in place too late. So they now started setting up their own monitoring systems. But having as a consequence that many cocoa farmers have already seen 3-4 people coming to measure their plots and to register the geolocations to make sure that they can trace the cocoa from ground to table. So a lot of farmers are also like wondering what is going on here. It's sometimes might feel as Big Brother is watching us. Next slide. Oh, this is just some statistics to show that why it is so important for them to comply is because, well, the top export destinations are all in the West, of which the Netherlands is number one. So if they are not able to comply, they might miss an important market. Next
5 minutes
slide.
left.
Finally, okay, yeah, thanks. So here indeed, the overview of the main importing countries: Netherlands, Belgium, Germany, Spain, France, all part of the European Union. And what is so interesting is I spent a month in Ghana in February, and I interviewed with a lot of different stakeholders. Some of them indeed see this as kind of neo-colonial, let's say a neo-colonial act endeavor. Others, however, said it might also help them to democratize the cocoa sector in Ghana. So I heard saying smallholders or farmers like, finally, we might have a better insight in how much money is taken away by the cocoa marketing board, where it might give us also insight in the margins along the value chain, which also allows us to fight for better prices. That all is a big question. What is going to happen? And is this indeed enhancing the control of big companies of a sector, or maybe even the European Union? Or is this going to lead to indeed more sustainable practices and maybe a stronger voice of the farmers? So there's still a lot of questions on how this regulation will play out. But it is a fact that attempting to make food systems more sustainable in one place does have impacts for food systems elsewhere. So in the case of Ghana, for example, many companies now invest strongly in agroforestry initiatives. Many farmers are now obliged to make sure that their farms are more diverse and that they grow new trees, not only cocoa trees, which might contribute to indeed enhanced biodiversity and more sustainability, but also comes with a consequence for the labor and the time spent on their farms. So actually, all just to show the complexity, and that changes here do have effect for changes in food systems elsewhere. I think there's one last slide, and then so these are the research questions in our research project. Who is actually defining these rules, and how can we make sure that also the values that farmers assign to their farming systems, to agroforestry, are better taken into account? The second question we try to address in the research project I'm part of is what are the different effects of the use of digital technologies? And how can we make them better accessible or better align with farmers' preferences? So that was in a nutshell a bit the research project I'm working on. I think where it links up to, this is of course an example of very much top-down food system change intervention, whereas Mutuma started from how niches and how minor initiatives smaller initiatives are trying to shake up the system. This shows that, there's also top-down influences, but with maybe repercussions that require attention. Yeah, that was my presentation. Oh, that's
wonderful. Thank you so much, Ellen. Very nice to hear your experiences and to see this other side of the coin as well, as you mentioned very eloquently at the end. a more top-down approach to changing the rules and sort of influencing the system versus what Mutuma shared. I think it's also clear that it's inevitable when you're talking about food system transformation that you'll touch somehow on these governance aspects, which will also come back in learning block 4. But Mutuma, I'm curious also to hear from your side. You're just hearing Ellen's presentation. What resonates in what she's sharing with you in terms of how systems operate and how certain change in system sometimes, even though well intended, can might have, let's say, indirect, unintended consequences. How does this resonate with you? Is that something that you recognize in the things you do at in Kenya and in your work?
Yeah, thank you very much, Ellen, for your wonderful presentation. I've really seen that you've been working between the university, Ghana, and the large policy shift around the deforestation in European Union. I would like to ask, especially about the question about blockchain. I've heard every farmer needs to have to register all their trees
Yeah.
into a blockchain. So I know those are the nitty-gritties when it comes to implementation,
Yeah.
tracking systems and everything. So does that not overload the system in terms of management, or is that the best approach to go?
No, you're very much right, Ursula. Absolutely. Yes, there's a lot of questions now because, like, underneath is, of course, also kind of a logic that things can be standardized. And it's a almost, yeah, one size fits all type of regulation. Whereas what we now see in Ghana is that is, well, land ownership is already a major complex issue. And then I've heard, I haven't visited, but that in Ghana also sometimes it happens that the trees are from someone else. So who's then responsible for the deforestation and who really owns the cocoa? Yeah, it shows that well, real life settings are so complex that they almost well, it's almost impossible to fit them in this standardization system. At the same time, actors do recognize that, well, deforestation has taken place and that they see biodiversity going down and that it's important to take initiative. But like you said, I heard a lot of people being skeptic saying, well, to what extent is this only a management system to, well, show how to say, to comply with for risk and compliance, and to what extent is it really going to lead to change? Because is this all really necessary that we track and trace everything? We can also better, maybe we might better invest it in paying the farmers a decent livelihood, so that they don't have to deforest in the first place. If they are, yeah, to blame, I'm not sure.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, because especially when it comes also to the deforestation aspect,
yeah,
uh, I've noticed, the fact that I also do consulting in agroecology.
yeah, yeah,
There's the communal aspect of bringing about change without, of course, people by deforestation. Maybe it means that they need firewood from
yeah,
trees, for example.
exactly.
And again, that's a cyclic need. They will also need firewood maybe in a year's time. So they'll need to plant more of their trees and whatnot. So we have been in communities where if you go the full-on approach where everything is standardized, everything is robotic, versus a place where it's communal, is
Yeah,
everyone is responsible for the whole. If it's a communal land or if everyone has their own land, we know
yeah,
we will need livelihood from that, from maybe the cocoa trees. And then there are other trees that we will need for firewood.
yeah,
So
yeah,
it,
yeah,
it, it becomes a need for everyone, even for the leaders to want to increase their cover, to influence people to increase cover. But also, I would like to ask, and I'm sure I've been asked in the comments, what's the best type of approach, top down or bottom up?
yeah,
Because
yeah. I was indeed. It is very nice that you asked this, Mutuma, because the project, the research project I'm part of now, aspires to make all these decisions and, let's say, governance more inclusive by indeed taking into account the values, the knowledges of those farmers, just recognizing that they know best what a forest is. But last week I got criticized for this as well, because someone said, like, well, actually what you're now doing is accepting that the table is there, but you try to make space for the farmer, whereas the question is, should have the table been there, and should it not have been the farmers who, well, designed the table? So, well, they criticize me for, well, taking into account their knowledges already. You accept that, well, the regulation should be there, whereas in the first place maybe there's different approaches. I agree, Mutuma. It's
And maybe it's not such a straightforward answer to say which is better, top down or bottom up. Maybe that's depending on the situation. And I'd actually like to elaborate with that on those elements a bit more.